I used to think 24-hour gas stations were like lighthouses for drivers. Safe, reliable, a little boring. Now I know better. Now, whenever I pass a glowing station sign on a dark highway, I feel my stomach knot up and my hands tighten on the wheel. Because one night, on a nearly empty stretch of highway, I pulled into a station that shouldn't have been there, and I'm still not sure I ever really left it. It was late January, cold enough that the breath inside my car fogged the windshield if I turned the defroster down for even a minute. I was driving back from a business trip, trying to make it home in one shot instead of paying for another night at a motel. The highway was a long, dark ribbon through flat farmland and patches of forest, with the occasional green sign promising an exit 5 or 10 miles away. I was running low on gas. The gauge was flirting with empty, and the little amber light had been nagging me for too long. My phone had no signal, my GPS map was stuck buffering, and every exit I passed seemed to lead to nothing but darkness. Then I saw it, a tall sign glowing at the side of the road. It was an older style, the kind with interchangeable plastic letters. The brand name on top was half burned out, leaving only a few flickering red and white segments. Underneath, blocky black letters on a white background announced, "Gas are food, restrooms." Open 24 hours. Relief washed over me. I took the exit, following the arrow toward a smaller 2-lane road. There were no other cars ahead or behind me, just the crunch of gravel as the pavement turned rougher, then smoother again. I rounded a bend lined with bare trees, and the station came into view. It sat alone in a wide, cracked lot, surrounded by darkness. There were 4 pumps under a flat metal canopy, its underside lit by humming fluorescent tubes that cast a sickly yellow light. The station itself was a squat building with big front windows full of faded posters for drinks and snacks. A single neon sign in the door blinked "Open" in dull red. But the strangest thing was how still it all was. No passing traffic, no distant highway noise. The air felt thick and muffled, like I'd driven under an invisible dome. I pulled up to a pump, killed the engine, and stepped out. The cold slapped me in the face. I shivered and fumbled for my card, jamming it into the reader. The screen stayed blank. No insert card, no select grade. Just a dull gray glow behind scratched plastic. "Great," I muttered. I tried again. Nothing. I glanced toward the store. The lights were on, but I didn't see anyone inside. I stepped away from the car, the crunch of my shoes on the cracked pavement sounding too loud in the stillness. As I walked toward the building, I noticed that some of the posters in the window were for brands I hadn't seen in years, drinks and snacks that had been discontinued or rebranded long ago. Their colors were washed out like they'd been sitting there for decades. Through the glass, the interior looked normal. A counter with a register, aisles of snacks, a cooler wall with drinks, but the shelves seemed oddly tidy. Nothing out of place, no half-open chip bags, no clutter. Just neat rows and stacks like a store that hadn't had customers in a long time. I grabbed the door handle, expecting it to be chilly, but it was strangely warm, almost like someone had just let go of it. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. Immediately, I smelled something off. Not rotten, not chemical, just a faint, stale scent, like an old house that's been shut up for too long. The air was the same temperature as outside, yet somehow it felt thicker. "Hello?" I called. "Pump's not working. I need to prepay." No answer. I walked slowly toward the counter. My footsteps didn't echo. The coolers hummed quietly along the back wall, but the sound was more like a recording of a hum than the actual thing. I placed my hand against one of the cooler doors. It wasn't cold. Something about the fluorescent lights inside seemed wrong, too. They were bright, but they didn't cast strong shadows. Everything looked evenly lit, flat, like a scene painted with no depth. "Hello?" I tried again, a little louder. That's when I noticed the man behind the counter. I hadn't seen him at first. He was standing very still, head bowed slightly as if he'd been looking down at something on the counter. He wore a faded red vest over a plaid shirt, like the uniforms from years ago. His hair was dark and perfectly combed, not a strand out of place. "Sorry, man, I didn't see you," I said, forcing a laugh. "Pump won't take my card. Can I pay in here?" Slowly, he raised his head. His face was unremarkable. Average build, average features, the kind of face you'd forget as soon as you walked out the door. But his eyes were wrong. They were focused directly on me. Yet there was a blankness in them, like he was looking through a pane of glass that separated us. No curiosity, no irritation, nothing. Just the idea of eyes. "Yes," he said, in a voice that sounded slightly off, like an old recording played at the wrong speed. "How much?" 50, I replied, pulling out my card. "If it doesn't fill it, I'll come back in." He didn't move for a second. Then his arms seemed to remember what it was supposed to do. He slid the card through an older-style reader by the register. I waited for the beep, the prompt, anything. Instead, there was a faint clicking noise somewhere under the counter. Then silence. "Pump is on," he said. I stared at him. "That's it?" He blinked slowly. "Pump is on." A chill crawled down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. "Okay, thanks." I turned and walked back toward the door, suddenly eager to be outside again. As I reached for the handle, the bell above the door jingled. Before I opened it, I froze and looked up. The bell swayed slightly, as if touched by a breeze I couldn't feel. I stepped out into the cold and inhaled deeply, relieved to be back in the crisp air. I walked to my car, slid the nozzle into the tank, and squeezed the handle. Gas flowed. The numbers on the pump finally flickered to life, old digital segments blinking as they climbed. I glanced back at the store. Through the glass, I could see the man behind the counter, still standing in the exact same position, staring at the door. Not moving, not adjusting anything, just watching. A prickling sensation crawled up my neck. I focused on the pump until it clicked off at just over $50. I put the nozzle back, screwed on the gas cap, and practically dove into my car. I turned the key. The engine started on the first try, but the sound was muted, like I was hearing it through headphones instead of with my own ears. I shook off the feeling and pulled out of the lot, turning back toward the small road that led to the highway. Except as I drove, the lot didn't seem to end. The pumps and the store receded in my rearview mirror, but the cracked pavement, flickering lights, and darkness beyond them just kept going. I drove for what felt like several minutes, but whenever I checked the mirror, the gas station was still there, same distance behind me, like it was following me without getting closer. My heart started pounding. I pressed harder on the gas pedal. The speedometer climbed, but the scenery stayed the same. Empty, dark space, faint outlines of leafless trees, the constant glow of the station receding in exactly the same way. Then, without any sense of transition, I was back at the pumps. No turn, no U-shaped curve. Just a hard, jarring cut in reality as my headlights swept over the same cracked concrete and the same 4 pumps. I slammed on the brakes, tires squealing. My car shuddered to a stop. I stared at the station, breathing hard. The open sign in the door flickered lazily. No other cars, no other people, just me and that building sitting under a sky that suddenly felt way too low. I thought. I didn't turn around. I know I didn't. I put the car in reverse, backed up carefully, and turned to face the direction I'd come from. The highway ramp should have been straight ahead, not far away. Instead, my headlights fell on more cracked pavement and the empty darkness beyond the edge of the lot. No signs, no road, just nothing. The lot didn't have edges anymore. It just faded into black. Panic clawed at my throat. I checked my phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi. The time frozen on the same minute it had been when I'd first pulled in. I tried to use the GPS. It couldn't find my location. I told myself this was impossible, that I must be too tired, hallucinating, or in some weird, half-asleep state. I clung to that explanation because the alternative was unbearable. There was only one thing left to try. I got out of the car and walked back toward the store. The bell above the door jingled by itself again just before I stepped inside. The man behind the counter was still there, still in the exact same position. "I can't find the road," I said, my voice shaking. "Is there another way back to the highway?" His eyes turned toward me, but they didn't light up with recognition. "You came from the highway?" he asked, like he was repeating a phrase he'd heard once. "Yes," I said. "From the west. I just need to get back on." He frowned slightly, as if thinking hurt. "Highway," he said slowly. "It's out there." He made a vague gesture toward the front door. "I know that," I snapped, fear boiling over into frustration. "But when I drive out there, I just end up here again. What's going on?" For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not exactly sympathy, not exactly fear. Just a faint awareness, like he was remembering something he didn't want to. "Sometimes," he said, "they don't find it again." A cold wave washed over me. "Sometimes who?" He stared at me. His next words came out too quickly, like he was reciting a script. "Would you like a receipt?" "What?" "For the gas," he said. $50. I shook my head. "I don't care about the receipt. I care about leaving." He blinked. For a moment, his gaze seemed to sharpen. "You left," he said quietly. I stared at him, not understanding. "You left," he repeated. "Already. You pulled out. You drove away. You're not here." His lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. Not anymore. The room swayed. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. "This is insane." He leaned forward slightly. The air between us felt suddenly colder. "Do you remember the last exit you saw before this one?" he asked. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I tried to picture the green sign names I'd been passing all night. Town names, numbers, distances. They slid away from me like oil on water. "Do you remember how long you'd been driving?" he pressed. I tried to think of when the sun had gone down, when I'd last stopped, when I'd last checked my phone and seen the time change. The memories were fuzzy, unfocused, like someone else's dream I'd been told about once. "When did you last feel tired?" he asked. I couldn't answer that either. I suddenly realized that my legs didn't ache, my eyes weren't burning, my back wasn't stiff. I felt neutral, as if my body had forgotten how to register fatigue. "What are you saying?" I whispered. He straightened. When he spoke again, his voice was flat, emotionless. "Sometimes they don't notice," he said. "They drive, and they don't notice when they go from almost to already." "Already what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Gone," he said. My heart hammered in my chest. I pressed my fingers to my wrist, searching for my pulse. I found it, but it felt weak, far away, like it belonged to someone else. I shook my head violently. No, I crashed or I fell asleep at the wheel, and this is some twisted dream. I'm in a hospital somewhere. The humming from the coolers cut out. The fluorescent lights above flickered once. For a moment, the entire station plunged into darkness. In that split second, I sensed movement. Not just the cashier, but shapes around me, filling the aisles, pressing close. People standing between the shelves, huddled in the corners, all completely silent, all watching. The lights flickered back on. The aisles were empty. The man behind the counter hadn't moved. "Sometimes," he repeated softly, "they don't leave." Something in me snapped. I bolted for the door, the bell shrieking overhead with a sound much louder than it should have been. I dove into my car, started it, and floored it across the lot, straight into the darkness. This time, there was no gradual change, no sense of distance. One moment I was surrounded by black. The next I was merging back onto the highway. Bright green signs whipping past, other cars rushing by, radio blaring some pop song. I was gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My phone buzzed in the cup holder with a new notification, the time suddenly current. It was like reality had slammed back into place around me. In my rearview mirror, I saw the exit I'd just taken. The sign was there, but the gas station listed under it was a different brand, a big corporate chain with LEDs and a restaurant attached. I kept driving. I didn't stop again until I was safely in my driveway at home. Later, I tried to find that small station on a map. I checked satellite images, street views, old listings. There was nothing like it anywhere along that stretch. I even drove that route again during the day, with a friend, just to prove to myself it didn't exist. We found the corporate station from the sign in my mirror. It was modern, bright, and busy. The cashier was a teenager with dyed hair and a nose ring. The coolers were fully stocked, and everything smelled like fresh coffee and cleaning solution. But as I stood at the counter paying for gas, I glanced at the wall behind her. Pinned among the notices and promotional flyers was an old, yellowed photograph of the station that had once stood in that spot. 4 pumps, flat canopy, faded sign. And behind the counter, barely visible through the glare on the glass, was a man in a red vest with a perfectly combed head of dark hair. My knees went weak. "Hey," I asked the girl, keeping my voice casual. "When did they tear down the old place?" She shrugged. "Like 20 years ago, before my time. They say it burned down or something. Why?" "Just wondering," I said. My mouth was dry. Did anyone get hurt?" She thought about it, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so. I remember my grandpa saying something about a fire starting at night when some guy fell asleep at the wheel and crashed into the pumps. Whole thing went up fast. They didn't even get everybody out." I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't want to know if they ever found the body of the cashier. I didn't want to know how many drivers had pulled in that night or how long they'd been driving almost before they became already. Now, every time I'm on a long stretch of highway at night and I see a lonely gas station glowing in the distance, I check the clock, feel my pulse, and ask myself one question. Am I sure I'm not already in the place you only reach when you don't realize you've gone too far? If you stopped at that station and the cashier told you you'd already gone from almost to gone, would you believe him or chalk it up to exhaustion and keep driving?